The Collages of Janet Kigusiuq, a case study in Inuit aesthetics, with school Mohr. An alternative title is Abstraction in Inuit Art and Exploration. My talk today celebrates and analyzes the collage work of Baker Lake artist Janet Kigusiuq. Her collages are singularly significant. Though they're not the first collages made in the North, they constitute the only significant body of collages made there. The earliest collage I found is a highly political one by the photographic artist Peter Pitsiolek from 1940, starring Clark Gable and bearing the prescient title, The Eskimo Will Talk Like the White Man. In addition, among the Kigusiuq collages are to be found some of the first completely abstract two-dimensional artworks from the North, though the prize for very first probably goes to Cape Dorset. In their radiant beauty, splendorous and numinous, the collages are also candidates for having ushered the aesthetic category of the sublime into Inuit art. By the sublime, I mean a sense of beauty which, by passing through the force field of the vast, the dark, the intractable, shifts from an awareness of a cozy, sensible loveliness to the experience of a supersensible, fear-tinged, but ultimately serene awe. One critic goes so far as to claim that the Kigusiuq collages are nothing short of glorious. Finally, the collages help dislodge Inuit art's formerly almost exclusive focus on narrative-based representations, scenes of camp life, excerpts from legend stories, and open Inuit art's horizons to include beauty in need of nothing but itself. Here we have, yes, art for art's sake. Along the way, I will lay out key design elements of Inuit art, provide some of its basic structure or grammar, as it were, the amalgam of tropes, styles, and tactics that make Inuit art distinctive as a look. In doing so, I hope to give a reasoned account of what we intuitively understand as Inuit aesthetics, and so enable collectors of Inuit art to better understand why we love what we love. I will also briefly suggest that the Kigusiuq collages pose challenges to Inuit art criticism as it's currently practiced. Now, not all Inuit collages have these magical effects. Here's a collage from 1967 by Kigusiuq's mother, Jessie Unarg. The collage bits here add nothing to the composition. They may as well have been stenciled. Before I go all analytic, let me first flip through some more examples of the Kigusiuq collages so that you can get a feel for them as a whole and note their range. Don't worry, I'll be returning to these. Almost all of the collages are 22 by 30 inches. They were all made between 1995 and 2003, initially as part of a 2-year diploma program that Arctic College offered at Baker Lake from 1995 to 1997. Also, before we get rolling, I would like to thank the following individuals and institutions for providing me images used in the presentation. In addition, I've availed myself of the literature. There is a small one devoted to the collages. Of particular significance are the 2008 catalog on abstraction in Kigusiuq's work by Cynthia Way that she wrote for the late Great Museum of Inuit Art, and a 2007 article on the collages in Inuit Art Quarterly by Kyra Fisher, who was the art instructor for the classes in which the collages were first made a decade earlier. We begin. Unlike the Pitsiolek and Unark collages, All of the Kigusiuq collages completely cover over their backings with colored patches. Within that common parameter, the collages fall into four distinct classes, two genuses, each with two species. One genus exhibits a classical fear of the void, the horror vacui of art speak, and address that horror by filling out the canvas with repeating design elements, almost like what also in art speak is called a diaper pattern. A pattern in which one or a small number of elements repeats in regular rhythms to blank the whole expanse. Nothing to do with babies. Some have representational content. Here is an example with char drying on a line, and here the char are still in the water. Other diaper pattern expanses are wholly abstract. By wholly abstract, I mean that the common observer, even one attuned to the artist's culture, could not tell just by looking at an image whether its subject, if one could even speak so, is animal, vegetable, or mineral, or has any species or even a genus without being provided a history of its production or a descriptive title. Without the title, who would guess that this collage had anything to do with a body of water, let alone a red one? In the diaper pattern works, the loosely marshaled phalanxes of small patches that fill out the void are cut with scissors, sometimes paper doll fashion through accordion folded sheets of tissue paper, though for all this they do not feel the least bit mechanical. The other genus of collages uses usually large-scale swaths and blotches of tissue paper. These elements are all hand-torn and presented without repetition of any shape. In these collages, Kigusiuq takes full flight. They divide into the same two subgroups. One subgroup has vestiges of representational content, in this case hints of lake and landscape, while the remainder are total abstractions. The collages made of torn paper, those suggestive of luminous vapors, dark musings, lyrical riffs, resplendent and grand, invoke the sublime. Now, what makes these collages tick? Where, aesthetically speaking, do they come from? Against the tide of Inuit art scholarship in general, in the readings the collages have received to date, I want to suggest that the artist is not the most fruitful focus of analysis. Rather, nearly everything of importance in the collages, aesthetically speaking, can be explained in terms of cultural and institutional forces beyond the artist. Now, admittedly, people love a good story. Nothing beats a hero narrative. It sells merchandise and cheers souls. And in Kigusiuq, there is much with which to engine a hero story. This holds for both her personal history and the arc of her artistic development. Kigusiuq's life is one of hard and constant work on behalf of her family. Firstborn of Jesse Unark, she serves as her mother's first lieutenant in raising 7 siblings under often unforgiving conditions on the lands, ones too often with starvation hovering around a stone-cold koodlig. In consequence of this service to family, she marries late, at 18, yet bears 13 children, 8 of whom live past infancy and 7 of whom are born on the land. Already in her mid-60s, she adopts a physically challenged grandchild. She's actively engaged in community and civic affairs. An admirable, long, praiseworthy life for sure, but it tells us nothing of significance about her work. The arc of Kigusiuq's art practice bounds from good through better to best. Her distinctive early style was characterized by blocky forms with heavy outlining, especially for hair, clothing, and structures, with color restricted to trims and everything placed against a blank expanse. Paradoxically, the early work is, all at the same time, stiff, leaden, cluttered, busy, colored, yet crying out for color. Often the drawing subjects are robustly populated group activities. As many as 50 people can be depicted variously building, celebrating, traveling, hunting. From there, her work rises in stages through compositions more relaxed, yet more thoroughly worked out, to finally works of glistening serenity. In haunting contrast to the early works, the collages are completely devoid of people. Her admiring critics to date attribute every aspect of the journey to internal resources, her, quote, intuitive understanding of all aspects of art. In contrast, this admiring critic, Mohr, will suggest that the collages are the product of two external forces. One cultural, a grammar of abstraction that deeply informs traditional Inuit aesthetics. The other institutional, the dictates of the art advisor who introduced collage to Kigusiuq as a course assignment. Kigusiuq's collages blend materials, methods, and styles imported from the South with key elements of traditional Inuit ways of seeing. The most common feature of Inuit graphics from their beginnings, at least in recorded history, to the present, is flatness of form without perspective. It shares this characteristic with totally abstract art from the 20th century. Think Jackson Pollock and Frank Stella. Traditionally, Inuit graphics, though using methods different than theirs, contain within themselves the stems of total abstraction. In traditional Inuit graphics, bodies present themselves as two-dimensional patches, planar shapes in art speak, on a ground that serves as both the picture plane, that is, the extension on which the patches appear to lie, and the substrate on which they actually are drawn, be it ice, caribou hide, wood, paper, canvas, or whatever. There are three ways to achieve this effect by what in architectural rendering are called elevation, side view or section, and plan. Elevation is the view of a three-dimensional object from the position of a vertical plane set beside the object's front side, head on. Elevation shows the body face forward with no internal rotation, no partial degree of profile, and no tilt. A side view is the same thing, though viewing the object, yes, from the side, a view that is in full profile. An architectural plan is a view of a 3D object seen vertically from above. It's an aerial or bird's eye view. It's drawn at the position of a horizontal plane passing through an object, here at the roof line, though usually at the building's floor level, producing an X-ray effect. All three of the strategies for achieving flatness are found using planar forms in what I believe are the earliest surviving drawings to come out of Inuit culture. That is, as distinct from its ancestral and immediately antecedent Thule culture, with its one-dimensional stick figure graphics as exemplified in this Thule comb handle found near Igloolik. Consider the three images I will be showing you next, the foundational forms, the origin story of Inuit graphics proper. The year is 1822, just a couple of generations after Thule culture transitioned into Inuit culture. During Captain William Perry's second voyage to the Arctic that year, an Igloolik Inuk who had never before seen a white person or pencil and paper, draws a two-dimensional patch shown in an elevation, a picture of the captain himself, full frontal and floating against the void. The artist strains to make everything appear as flat as possible by turning the captain's hands and feet unnaturally outward. Flat, flat, flat. Here the same visual artist achieves the same flatness of planar shapes by showing people marshaled in profile. Finally, in this drawing's top two rows, the same artist shows in plan or aerial view 2 rows of robust whales. It's a little hard to see, but there are 3 narwhals, 1 double-tusked and all headed to the right, plus a bowhead headed to the left. Below are 2 rows of land animals, all in full left profile. One of Boaz's Inuit informants during his 1884 stay in Cumberland Sound, near what is now Pang, provides a more legible example of a drawing in plan. The drawing shows a group of people, mostly inside, but 2 outside a large snow hut, a men's lodge. The snow hut itself and the object in the middle, which we are informed is a urine barrel, are shown from an aerial point of view. The people are shown in elevation. So in a single image, we have different objects presented from different viewpoints, but all the objects are depicted lying flat on one and the same picture plane. The mix and match use of flattening viewpoints within a single work is perhaps the most distinctive characteristic of Inuit art. Here, one and the same scene is depicted using 1 aerial view, 1 elevation, 2 profile views, so a total of 4 viewpoints with 3 implied horizon lines, dithering. And no wonder Simon Takumi, when asked whether he had ever seen Picasso's, answered no. All he needs to produce these 3 faces in one, an elevation plus 2 profiles, was Inuit visual culture, not cubism. These techniques of abstraction provide foundational structures for Kigusiuq's collages. First, an easy example of elevation. A crag cast in silhouette causes the land, the crag's rocky base, and the sky to collectively form a depthless vertical slab. Here we have a lake, land, and an island laid out in aerial view. Finally, this collage deploys mixed views, a landscape in both elevation and plan. The yellow band at the bottom flags a horizon line, the green above, sky. Midfield, Russian violet hills at left and right are presented in elevation, and between them and at lower left, shown jointly in aerial view and dusty rows, are a lake and either its ingress or egress. The result is a frieze-like array pulling all of its collage's elements into the same picture plane. Flat, flat, flat. Now, how did it come to be that Kigusiuq had these design arrows in her quiver? Consider this drawing. It's the moment, the primal event in Baker Lake graphics. What we have on screen is the earliest known drawing by a member of the Uktuhik-Salingmiut, the Inuit group of which Jesse Unark and Luke Anguhadluk's interlocked extended families were part. It's the only drawing that is not a map presented in Rasmussen's account of his June 1923 visit with this population near the mouth of the Back River, about 150 miles north of Baker Lake. So Baker Lake is at the tip of the blue arrow, and the tip of the red arrow shows where Rasmussen encountered these Baker Lake artists in waiting. In near sketch map fashion, the drawing depicts the 2 different seasonal modes of fishing in the Back River area. At left, we have fishing at weirs in summer, and at right a method unique to the Utkus, in which during winter months a trough-like wedge is cut through lake ice inside a snow hut, which is surrounded with ice windows made by clearing the snow in patches and a half-circle swath around the hut. The drawing was made by Kigusiuq's father, Kabluna, 3 years before her birth. All of the styles of flattening and abstraction that we have seen in Inuit art so far are found in the drawing. The weir and hut are viewed aerially, with the hut seen in X-ray vision. The people and tents are shown variously in elevation profile and aerially, and with no common horizon line amongst the items shown in elevation. Dithery. Would it be a bridge too far to suggest that the bones of abstraction are part and parcel of the Inuit way of seeing and representing? To get a better handle on flatness and abstraction, let's take a brief look at its enemy, perspective. It's through perspective that 3D space and 3D objects, the furniture of realism, are created graphically. Perspective is the means by which the illusion of 3 dimensions gets represented across just 2. On screen is a workbook page that was widely used for explaining perspective to elementary school children in 1908 America. The most characteristic feature of perspective is that objects are drawn in ever smaller sizes as the distance the artist wants the observer to suppose extends between her and the objects increases. And this is achieved by having objects' dimensions along the line of sight, that is, the line running from the viewer to an imaginary horizon line at eye level, made shorter and shorter as they raise towards eye level, and at the same time narrower and narrower across the line of sight. Objects represented are shortened, contracting in the direction of depth, so that the illusion of extension in space is obtained. So here on screen, thanks to the accelerated narrowing of the railroad ties back to front and side to side, we witness the ex nihilo creation of expansive volumes of space and railroad tracks being filled with a plump train, which can be drawn using the trunk illustrated in perspective just below these tracks as a general guide. Perspective is virtually nowhere to be found in Inuit art almost up to the present, and pretty much only ever produced by artists who, like Kigusiuq's youngest sibling, William Noah, had spent long periods immersed in white visual culture. The dynamics of perspective entail that any technique which blocks the recession of forms away from the viewer tends towards abstraction. Any design that introduces into a composition a vertical grid, a frieze-like array, or a tabular form as a foundational element gets mapped out as ranks and columns of rows, will tend to pull all its components into a single plane, blocking the recession of shapes needed for realism. Grids were anticipated by Captain Perry's visual informant. His people are laid out in a rough grid of slightly fan-like columns crossed by 3 bands, top, middle, bottom. Though the people are of various sizes, they read as all falling in the same plane. Grids and foreshortening also perform foundational work in Kigusiuq's overall development, and the collages in particular. In her middle period drawing, she starts laying out designs using grids. Here we have 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 rows again, 1, 2, 3, 4, with the rows or bands mapped out and separated by 3 horizontal lines that cross the whole sheet. Collectively, the rows and columns form a single vertical picture plane for the whole work. Anti-realist grids appear frequently in the collages, especially those that have representational elements, sometimes bluntly so, as in the case of these fish. Here we have a far more subtle grid array, a rectangle tucked into an L, which itself is made up of columns and rows. And here we have columns and rows embedded in an overall rectilinear form. In these works, traces of representation are vehicles for the formal elements of art, the impact of which do not depend upon representation. Pattern, repetition, rhythm, balance, emphasis, harmony. These are what the drawings are about. Abstraction is its essence, content its accident. Its formal elements press towards pure design. Grids energize even the totally abstract collages, not only those that are made of scissored paper and which fear the void, but also those made from torn swaths, and do so even though these works tend towards the nebulous. So all the tropes by which perspectiveless flatness is achieved in traditional Inuit art are also present in the collages and hurtle them towards abstraction. But the final push to full abstraction comes not from aesthetics inherited from Inuit culture, but from a settler art instructor in an institutional setting, the classroom. Kigusiuq goes to college. In 1995, after a 5-year hiatus in the Baker Lake print program, and with no federal funds available with which to try to restart it, the Fine Arts and Crafts program of the territorially funded Arctic College, with a view to rebooting print collections at Baker Lake, offered a 2-year program in drawing and printmaking there. A ceramicist turned print artist, Kyra Fisher, who had been teaching at the University of Calgary, was given a 2-year contract to run the program and teach the classes. She did an excellent, indeed heroic job. A robust slate of courses was offered, quite the most rigorous set of art offerings the Canadian Arctic seen to date. Classes were offered in 2- and 3-dimensional design, drawing, art history, and printmaking techniques, including some techniques utterly new to the North, including 2 exotic ones called collography and collage, but also woodcuts, which replaced traditional stone cuts since no adequate ventilation system was available in the abandoned and dilapidated swimming pool building that served as the Art Academy. In the woodcuts, Kigusiuq reverted to her old ways, with stiff, leaden, blocky forms laid out in thick delineation. She would shine elsewhere. In the 2- and 3D design courses, Fisher taught papier-mâché. Here we find Kigusiuq in a humorous mood, and collage. Bingo! Now, while not a taskmaster, Fisher did have definite ideas about what she wanted from her pupils, even though the youngest of them was 45 and many of them were already listed artists. The students dutifully carried out the expectations the instructor laid upon them. As Fisher herself has put it, teaching the Baker Lake artist was quite unlike teaching the undergraduates at the University of Calgary. Anything I asked of my Baker Lake students, they did without question. Now, one important constraint on Kigusiuq's collages, those constraints not within the horizon of the artist's choice or making, but that shape their aesthetics anyway, are the very materials from which they're made. These materials were provided by Fisher, were the only options for making the collages, and were all foreign to Inuit life and the North, indeed, North America. The collages are composed by affixing what is called acrylic medium, basically colorless acrylic paint, often vividly colored translucent tissue papers, attaching these to usually half sheets of an art paper known as BFK Reeve. The underlayment and adhesive are both from France, the tissue papers from Japan. BFK Reeve is an ultra high quality, versatile paper made with 100% cotton fiber. It's a bright, white, smooth to the touch, soft, strong yet pliable sheet. Its brightness and whiteness are what impart luminosity to the translucent collages. The collages glow from within. The tissue papers from which the collage designs are assembled, known as Japan paper or washi, are handmade from the inner bark of, most often, mulberry bushes. They're desired for their thinness, pliability, and durability. They're available in a wide array of hues, saturations, and brightnesses. Kigusiuq used them in all of their dimensions. Their translucence combined with the brightness of the underlayment contributes to the sublimity of the collages, and the textures that they have contribute to the collage's abstractness. Patches from such paper do not read as having any cellular structure. The uniform color and relatively uniform textures of the collage's colored patches entail that unlike patches cut, say, from a magazine, like those used for the Pizziola collage, these cannot be used for representational effects within the four corners of the patch itself. Often you recognize a Kigusiuq drawing as a landscape because its component color blocks have internal features that clearly read as representing, say, pebbled shores or river rapids. But when executed in tissue paper, these same blocks of color become abstractions, uniform zones of color. So with the washi, we shift from drawings like these with cellular structures to abstractions like this one. The art instructor also imposed techniques and styles that made a significant impact on the look of the collages. Despite having severely arthritic hands, Kigusiuq preferred to create collaging shapes with scissors, but the art instructor insisted, at least for classroom exercises, that the tissue papers be torn. This seemingly slight intervention had a big impact. It eliminates the use of lines and outlining that is so prominent in the drawings, and in consequence smooths away the blockiness that haunts Kigusiuq's non-collage work from the beginning to the very end. Often in her drawings, Kigusiuq would first cut out a shape in stiff paper, then use that as a template to trace bounded forms onto the ground sheet, delineating, literally blocking out a field. This structuring of discrete bounded borders reads in the final product of the drawings and those of the collages with cut forms, but is finessed in the collages with torn patches with their deckled and feathered edges. The waviness of overlapping expanses of color in the torn tissue collages also has a calming effect. Though the torn patches are frequently numerous, with many bold and varied colors, the collages are not busy, not jittery. They read in this regard more like works executed in pastels. The heaviness, yea, clunkiness of many of the Kigusiuq drawings give way in the torn tissue collages to a bearable, indeed embraceable lightness of being, downy, buoyant, cloud-built, ethereal. A stylistic requirement that the art instructor imposed, forced her term, on her charges was that the background, the field across which the design spreads, could not be left a void, an unarticulated, non-integrated negative space, as it was in lots of traditional Inuit graphic work, including Kigusiuq's early works, where figures float against a void and have blank and unarticulated negative spaces. In the classroom work, backgrounds had to be incorporated, taken up into, addressed in some way, rather than left a dead space, mere expanse, contributing nothing to the works. Perhaps as a challenge, the instructor adds a second restriction to the exercise, one that pushes somewhat in the opposite direction to the first. She presents her students with a bowl of fruit set against an unarticulated expanse to use as a model for the initial exercise with this new goal of integrating the background into the final look. The instructor admits that such working from models itself runs counter to traditional Inuit practices. In response to the somewhat conflicting demands, Kigusiuq had several strategies. One is to blanket the whole visual field with repeating forms. This is done in a couple of ways. First, with appeals to and reproductions in collage of past pre-collage era drawings that are more or less had to begin with the aesthetic called for. Second, by repeating the globular forms of the model's fruit and then extending this gesture into other natural kinds. Here, what gets labeled as snow. In a second strategy for addressing the demand for integrated backgrounds, the border zones of the ground are no longer left mere edges without visual impact. In the early drawings, the figures are set against the void. Rather than mere absences, borders become an active presence, lively frames with as much punch as that which they surround. Finally, in the full abstractions, foregrounds and backgrounds are often so blurred as to illuminate the distinction between them. In these works, Kigusiuq achieves the level of abstraction and the sublime found in the early total abstractions of Mark Rothko and the color field paintings of Helen Frankenthaler. One feature of the Kigusiuq collages that cannot be explained by reference to outside forces, cultural and institutional, is their extraordinary and, given her early work, surprising use of color, a use that largely defies analysis. As far as the art instructor's report on the collage classes goes, no special instruction was given on the subject. A few of her color choices in the collages reference classical color theory. For example, the pat recommendation in Art 101 to use complementary colors, opposites across the color wheel, like blue and orange or red and green. Generally, between 4 and 7 colors are used, a well-modulated palette, though thought out in advance of their use. No color theory I'm aware of, though, can explain Kigusiuq's color choices in general. But her color choices contribute a great deal to the abstractness of the clauses, since the choices most often, float independently of representation. A lake or a river can be blue, but it is at least as often dusty rose, purple, red, black, green, or brown. In the total abstractions, repetitions of colors create shifting harmonies, as it were, without adding to representational content. In the collages that have suggestions of vestiges, hints of such content, the unnatural use of colors vaporizes depiction, verisimilitude, and materiality. But for color choices, though, the Kigusiuq collages are the product of external forces. Everything that is aesthetically salient and analyzable about them can be explained without reference to the artist. The literature of Inuit art has gradually acknowledged the significant aesthetic interventions made by the actual hands-on printmakers of the prints over and above the assumed star role of the artist who make the drawings on which the prints are based. But especially of late, it's paid far less attention to contributions from art advisors, and then treats art advisors almost always as impresarios rather than interveners in the creative process. To take note of that might draw awkward attention to art as a colonizing project and make the works appear less authentically Inuit. But if you doubt the force of the art advisor's aesthetic role, consider two examples. After her 2-year contract with art at Collage ended, Fisher stayed on in Baker Lake until early 2000, running an art gallery and heroically volunteering time, energy, and organizational skills to seeing to it that a print edition was issued in 1997 based on the classes she had taught, the first print edition from Baker Lake since 1990. In her shop, a couple of the Kigusiuq collages sold to fancy clients, and this prompted an explosive period of collage production by Kigusiuq. A vast majority of the collages, upwards of 50, were produced in 1 year, 1999. Fisher eventually moved, if briefly, to Cape Dorset, where from May of 2006 to May of 2007, she serves as the manager of the art division of the West Baffin Eskimo Co-op and writes a guide to Cape Dorset artists. At the co-op, lightning strikes a second time. This time with Cape Dorset graphic artist Saezi Kianelli. When Fisher arrives, Kianelli is producing ho-hum, mostly realistic landscapes drawn in perspective. But then, presto changeout, she starts producing highly abstract landscape drawings and full abstractions in collage. Though if I told you there's an Inukshuk hidden amongst the tissue slabs here, it might appear to you. This sudden jump shift to collage work that is nearly identical to Kigusiuq's cannot be accidental. Kianelli then almost immediately shifts her style again, this time to what I call Cape Dorset cute, which with at least one notable exception continues to be the dominant style of work coming out of Kingate. An equally blunt intervention took place at Baker Lake in 1965. An art advisor who, after a brief stint in Baker Lake, went on to advise at nearly every print program in the Arctic, produced a small uncatalogued print collection at Baker, about which, alas, very little is known. But it contains 2 stone-cut prints by the carver Vital Machpa. Here's one, a stone-cut impression laid over an irregularly daubed color field that fills just the central portion of an otherwise blank sheet. And here's the other, a stone cut where the edges of the stone block from which it is printed have not been trimmed away, and so, when inked, print as a ragged border around the representational image that it frames. 5 years on, now working under the freewheeling Baker Lake art directors Jack and Sheila Butler, Machpa, left to his own devices, produces this stone cut. A teensy isolated figure floating against the vast undecorated void. What's going on here? Print collectors will instantly recognize the style of the 2 1965 Baker Lake stone cuts. In them, the art director is clearly trying to reproduce 2 distinctive styles of prints that have been published in the Cape Dorset print catalogs from the immediately preceding years. One produces the distinctive print style that James Houston brought back to Cape Dorset from his late 1958 study trip to Japan and introduced first in the 1959 Cape Dorset catalog, while the other directly imitates the distinctive print style developed at Poe, and which was introduced to the world through the 1962 Cape Dorset print catalog. The style of the two Baker Lake prints is entirely the work of the art advisor, not the Inuit artist. Institution 1, Artist 0. Taking all of this together, the Kigusiuq collages raise two challenges to the standard model of Inuit art criticism. Here I can only flag the challenges, not argue for them in full. The collages give reason to believe that Inuit art criticism's twin focuses on the artist as the key to understanding a work of art and on education as the function of a work of art are misdirected. On the standard model, the meaning of a work of Inuit art is to be determined by reference to the intentions of the artist, and one finds those out by interviewing the artist. The standard model crystallized in 1982, just at the point when Inuit art was finally shifting from being almost exclusively a marketing concern of the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs to also being an aesthetic concern of museums and the Academy. Retailing did not require a theory of interpretation. Museums and the Academy did. So in September of that year, a conference of 70 curators and specialists in Inuit art was held in Ottawa, organized by the Department of Northern Affairs and sponsored by the Canadian Eskimo Art Council. Several of the attendees are still active in the field. The final round of panels addressed approaches to interpreting Inuit art, and by the end of the conference, a consensus had emerged over a dissent from Patricia Ryan that the best method for interpreting Inuit art was to fly north and interview Inuit artists where they live. The meaning of an work of art was whatever the artist thought it meant. It was a method for which one could get grant money. The conference showed no awareness at all of the then current and still now going trends in theories of interpretation, in all of which the artist as all-knowing, fully self-aware, articulate, craftsman-like God in miniature, as heroic individualist and genius to boot, these have all been dethroned. In the late 40s and 50s, a group called the New Critics, who hailed originally from the University of Chicago, argued that the meaning of a work of art, just because it was a meaning, an account, an explanation, rather than a baptism, not a stipulation, had to be something publicly analyzable, capable of public assessment when set against the work of art itself. The author had no exclusive or privileged access to such assessment. Even if one could overcome the difficulties in figuring out an author's intent, a task multidimensionally difficult in the case of Inuit artists, the meaning of a work of art could not depend on an in principle, irrebuttable opinion of any single individual, any more than the meaning of a word could be. After all, it's Humpty Dumpty of Looking Glass Land who claims that language means just exactly whatever he and he alone says it means. Meanwhile, by the time of the Ottawa Conference, the 1960s death of the author movement that had originated in France was in full flight internationally, and it's still with us. In this view, any particular author and the very idea of an author were products of cultural, social, and political forces. The artist operates not as a godlet, but as a clairvoyant scribe, writing out ideas authored by society. The artist is a mere placeholder to which meanings with social origins are attached, like pinning cloaks of many colors to a characterless clothesline. My interpretation of Kigusiuq, though primarily deploying formal strategies, reaches this very conclusion. Unfortunately, Inuit art criticism continues to be oblivious to the challenges that critical theory poses for it. The guest editor's introduction to the current issue of Inuit Art Quarterly asserts that, as much as possible, she has addressed the artist's intentionality when analyzing and including their work in the issue. The editor isn't even aware of what the issues are. The Kigusiuq collages also pose a second challenge to Inuit art criticism. As a matter of common practice, Inuit art critics tend to take the aims of Inuit art to be at core educational. The intention of the artist is taken often tacitly to be a desire to teach the viewer aspects of Inuit culture, variously material and intellectual. The first paragraph of the National Gallery of Canada's 2023 biography-based catalog, Nick Sikulark, is explicit about its didactic aims. It assures us that, rooted in his connection to his homelands, Sikulark's artworks are valued for the cultural knowledge they hold. But Kigusiuq's collages have no message, just are not didactic. They impart neither information nor instruction. They are not keepers of knowledge nor tellers of stories. They do not solidify identities, promote the general welfare, or hold tight the old ways. The artist's education view of Inuit art reduces prints and drawings to at best book illustration. Legend drawings, for example, to be at all intelligible, read as the particular stories they depict, require that the viewer is already familiar with the legends depicted. In an effort to see the works as educational, critics have tended to overlook or play down the abstract dimensions of Inuit art and impose realism upon works where it is absent. But even with issues of abstraction and realism set aside, art just isn't a very good medium for history and ethnography. For ideology, well, that's a different matter. But history and ethnography, no. Those are jobs for historians and ethnographers, subject as they may be to the blandishments of ideology. The Iqaluit-based artist Germaine Arnott-Tayac gets it right. She says, when I want to learn about Inuit culture, I read Rasmussen. As a number of critics have noticed, Inuit art drawings tend to view Inuit life through a romantic haze. Robert Patterson, who served as an art advisor for prints at Baker Lake, Hove, Cape Dorset, and Clyde River, observes that the prints from these locales are dripping with nostalgia. This is so for Kigusiuq. Her drawings of caribou hunting scenes always show the hunters using bows and arrows. She never presents a gun anywhere, though hunting rifles had been in continuous use at Baker Lake since 1908. Before she was born in 1926, bows and arrows had already passed into the past amongst the Utkus. In a 1982 interview with Mame Jackson, Kigusiuq reports that she had no first-hand experience with bows and arrows and knows of them only what her grandmother used to tell her. By the time of Rasmussen's arrival amongst the Utkus in 1923, all hunting of caribou on land was executed with guns used by hunters working individually rather than in coordinated groups, resulting in large-scale cultural and religious disruptions. It was guns as much as the Catholic oblates and Anglican presbyters that were putting the old gods out of business. Or as Rasmussen's primary informant put it, now that we have firearms, it's almost as though we no longer need shamans or taboo. Now we can shoot caribou everywhere with our guns, and the result is that we have lived ourselves out of the old customs. On the plane of intellectual rather than material culture, a similar nostalgia and idealization suffuses Heather Iglesias' 2016 treatise on the nature of Inuit art. She holds that the function of both Inuit art and Inuit art criticism is to elucidate and propagate the things which Inuit have always known to be true, as set out in Government of Nunavut white papers. So art again is book illustration, and art criticism now functions as soft power propaganda and boosterism, that is, when it's not simply cheerleading. Boosterism can be a great motivator for action, but it's a lousy basis for action. Thanks in the main to Shrivina Ashuna, Inuit art is finally making inroads on the international art scene in ways that make a difference. Not just by appearing in lots of venues, but in ones like Art Basel Miami, the Venice Biennial, and earlier this year, the Outsider Art Fair in New York City and London's The Perimeter, venues that showcase the going artwork of the world as a whole. But if Inuit art criticism is to be taken seriously outside the confines of Inuit Art Quarterly, it needs to address art in the going interpretive modes of art criticism in general, not as biography, not as tutelage. For both theoretical and practical reasons, Inuit art criticism needs to turn away from biographical and educational models and take a cultural studies approach, which studies the tactics and strategies that social, cultural, and political forces use to create art and in turn critically assess the effects that art has on politics, society, and culture. I say this even as I acknowledge these sorts of analysis are not my forte, but the Kigusiuq collages compel me to this very conclusion. Thank you.